And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Live picture there in Jerusalem. Well, earlier today, Israel's cabinet approving a deal for a ceasefire in Gaza that would release dozens of hostages held there and pause the 15-month war with Hamas, bringing the sides a step closer to ending their deadliest and most destructive fighting ever. This was the photo put out by the Prime Minister's office saying the Security Cabinet discussion has begun. They say before the meeting, an operational security assessment was held on the implementation of the agreement, chaired by Prime Minister Netanyahu, together with the negotiating team, which has returned from Doha. So I believe we're just getting this in. It's very early in Israel right now, and the cabinet there that you see at the beginning of their meeting has now approved a deal. Well, Fox News correspondent Mike Tobin has more.
After 15 months of fighting, days of delays, and several last-minute crises, Israel's security cabinet has finally approved a ceasefire deal with Hamas. The three-phase agreement starts with a pause in the fighting. Hostages will then be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners, and the Israeli military will slowly withdraw from Gaza and allow more aid deliveries.
It's taken 8 months of non-stop, relentless effort by my administration to get it done. We kept the pressure on Hamas, and we got it done.
Now the focus turns to implementation. Mediators from Qatar and Egypt say the ceasefire will go into effect on Sunday, but as of this morning, Israeli airstrikes were still hammering Gaza, and it won't be easy to get either side to back down.
We have to work hand on hand in order to start the implementation of this agreement without any delay. That's of great importance in order to secure the release of all hostages.
The deal also calls for negotiations on Phase 2 to start 16 days after the ceasefire begins, and a lot can happen in that time, including a political shakeup in Israel. Several conservative lawmakers opposed to the agreement and threatening to leave Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's fragile coalition government.
It includes the release of hundreds of murderous terrorists. In fact, this deal will end all the achievements we were able to bring to the state of Israel.
The agreement calls for 33 hostages to be released over the next 6 weeks, all of them women, children, and men over the age of 50. In Tel Aviv, Mike Tobin, Fox News.
Mike, thanks so much. In the meantime here, let's bring into the conversation someone who has guided us through this story every step of the way. That's national security analyst and retired Marine intelligence officer Hal Kempfer. He joins me. Hal, happy Friday. Good to see you. And I think it's safe to say that this is a really, really good piece of news going into the weekend. And I think a lot of people, though, who are watching and who have followed our conversations over the last 15 months are asking themselves, Hal, well, what is this going to look like? The mechanics of it. As we get nearer to Sunday, do we know where the hostages will be released? Do we know who will be facilitating that and shepherding them into Israel? Do we know also who will be released? Is there a list of names? We've just had this 33 number. Are we wanting more specifics, and are we right to want more of those specifics? Do you happen to know them?
Andrew, on Sunday, what we're going to see is 3 women are going to be released, all right, is my understanding, and then they're going to have 30 Palestinians will then be released as well. I'm not sure which gate they're going to use. I've heard a couple different gates, but it'll be obviously ground movement. Now, if the Israelis, I have no doubt, will have medevac helicopters standing by. The moment those hostages come out, they're going to be whisked off to hospitals for medical evaluation and treatment as necessary. So that's going to be, then the next phase, it's going to be 5 more prisoners should be released, and there should be 50 Palestinian, or 5 hostages should be released, then 50 Palestinian prisoners should be released. And they're going to kind of go through this sequential level. The first, there will be a kind of a surge, if you will, up front of from what I can gather. There'll be a surge up front of hostages being released and a surge of Palestinians being, prisoners being brought back in. And then it will slow down. You got to remember, this is a 42-day phase 1. So there is a bit of time. There's 33 prisoners total. It is about a 10-to-1 ratio. That's what they agreed upon. Right. For every hostage, there's 10 Palestinians. One of the big hurdles was they actually have murderers, if you will, killers who have killed Israelis or part of the Palestinians being released. That was not an insignificant political hurdle to work through that Netanyahu agreed to. So that's what you're going to see on the ground. The other thing you're going to see also is, according to what they've agreed to, is an incredible surge of trucks. there's going to be about 600 trucks go surging into the Gaza Strip with all kinds of aid. And that is going to be unprecedented. I mean, we've been looking at various different sizes, amounts of trucks, but you know, 100, 200 a day, maybe that's going to triple or more what we're normally seeing going in. So that's going to be a huge change on the ground. Now, what we probably won't see is any rapid retrograde or pulling back of Israeli forces initially.
Okay.
They are agreed to do that, not in completion, but they've agreed to do that. The last thing they're going to pull out of is the Philadelphia corridor down the south part of Gaza with Egypt, but they're going to gradually pull back. But I do not expect to see any rapid retrograde of Israeli forces because they want to see if this thing's going to work. You know, there's a lot of questions on this, and frankly, the big question is, will there be a phase two?
Yeah.
You know, the incredible headwinds that Netanyahu's dealing with.
So I think that's why so many people are on pins and needles. I can't even imagine what the family members of these hostages, you know, who are waiting with bated breath if their loved ones are in this first tranche of 33 people who will be released, because a weekend is a long time, Hal, for things to go wrong. And are you skeptical? Do you have kind of a pit in your stomach about any snags from now till then? And I wanted to ask, you know, the first and only hostage release and ceasefire deal that lasted about a week's time back in November of 2023, from what I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, it did not require the levels of approval in kind of the Israeli political strata. You know, you first have the war cabinet, and then the security cabinet, and then the full Knesset here. Is that something different now?
This is a much broader agreement. That was a very short agreement. It's very tactical. I don't recall that either. I don't remember the Knesset voting on it. I do believe that the war cabinet had to approve it. I don't think the full cabinet had to approve it. Of course, part of the problem is this thing's so big and it's so overarching that, and as you know, within the cabinet, especially, you know, with Treasury Minister Smotrich, he's very much dead set against where this is going. In fact, he has absolutely said no phase two. There are a lot of questions of whether there may be a deal that Prime Minister Netanyahu struck with him on that is just simply not being discussed. You know, that's been a wide amount of speculation the last few days as to whether there is some sort of deal on that. But the reality is there are real headwinds, and for Netanyahu, even though the lead for the opposition party has said, "Hey, we got you, we'll back you. If members of your coalition fall out, you know, we'll back you through this thing." The problem with Prime Minister Netanyahu faces is, yeah, but you are the opposition, and the moment I have my current coalition start to fall apart, as soon as we get this thing done, I know you're going to pull the rug out from under me, which they probably will, and his cabinet, his coalition will collapse, and they'll have an election, and then he'll be voted out. So he's got a lot of political balancing, which kind of goes back to the first issue. Could this thing fall apart? There are a lot of friction points in this agreement, and it could be, there is some thought it's phase one and done, which is they get the phase one thing, and there's enough problems in that it doesn't go any further. The other issue, too, is what's happening on the ground. The expectation, in fact, the Institute for the Study of War looked at this, and they said the full expectation is that Hamas is going to move its cells all around Gaza. They're going to take advantage of the fact that they're not under fire when they're moving. They're going to go back to reoccupying wherever they can. They're going to reconstitute as much as possible. They're going to do whatever they can to rearm.
But how many Hamas fighters can reconstitute? I mean, they've been degraded hugely over the course of the last 15 months. So yes, we talk about the reconstitution of them as a fighting force, but it will be muted from when they first launched their assault October 7th, right?
It will not look like they were on October 7th by any means. But here's a very disturbing statistic. They have recruited as many or maybe even more Hamas fighters as they have lost in this entire war. That is a very disturbing statistic. With this prolonged ceasefire in place, it's a guessing game as to how many more they could recruit on top of that. But the fear is not that they're going to turn into 27 or 29 armed brigades like we saw when this thing kicked off, but But the fear is that they could reconstitute and become a very, very debilitating insurgent force that could cause serious problems. And of course, if phase one ends and there is no phase two, Israel's got to go back in there. And for IDF planners, they're looking at this saying, look, we're going to have to go in there. And they know they're going to end up potentially having to fight for the same positions, the same terrain that they've already taken. And of course, for any military commander to have to go back and retake, I mean, the old saying is retake the hill. But in this case, retake this block or retake this building or retake this particular area. That's very, very frustrating. And then keep in mind, we also have all the other hostages that have not been released in phase one. And the fear is, will they ever get them back now if phase one is one and done? And if they have to go back and fight, will they end up inadvertently possibly killing some of those Israeli hostages? So there's a lot of considerations that go into this.
So, Hal, there was an idea a couple of months back proposed of a possible kind of demilitarized zone in Gaza. But you were saying under phase one, the Israelis have to leave en masse totally. They can't have a presence in Gaza at all under phase one. Because we were talking about the Philadelphia corridor, that border between Egypt and Gaza. That was a huge sticking point in the negotiations late summer. We didn't think Bibi Netanyahu was going to give up that or make that concession. He did here. Were you surprised by that?
I was a bit surprised, but I don't know if they're going to pull out entirely in phase one. What I'm seeing right now is the Philadelphia corridor is going to stay armed, and then at the beginning of somewhere in phase two, it looks like there's a full withdrawal of Israeli forces. Phase one, there's been some language there about pulling out of some of the major urban areas, but not giving up the whole thing. And then phase two, they would pull out of the whole thing. That's why I think phase two is going to be much more difficult to negotiate and implement than phase one, as far as that goes. The Philadelphia corridor should be removed, but then there's a discussion about phase two, about foreign forces coming in as peacekeeping forces potentially before they go to phase three, which is they start reconstruction. There are so many details to work out on this. I have to tell you, I hate to be skeptical, but I'm a little skeptical that they're going to do this. And frankly, historically, what we've seen is when Netanyahu is facing great political peril at home versus doing his statesman-like thing, which is, to say, look, I don't care about what's happening at home. I'm going to do this. Generally speaking, Netanyahu is a political survivor. And I think that he'll probably, have to work with his coalition. And that makes it very difficult to do something like what's envisioned with a phase two.
Hal, just lastly, because some folks online are asking me to ask this question, but I think it's an interesting one, and I'm going to ask it. And we've talked already, though, about the similarities and the hallmarks between the Iranian hostage crisis, the release January 20th, 1981, in between the Carter and Reagan administrations, and now this scenario that we find ourselves in, outgoing Biden administration, incoming Trump administration. Inauguration is on Monday. The hostage release is happening on Sunday, early Monday morning in Israel. I would imagine, when I'm probably on the air getting things kicked off for our inauguration coverage, we're going to be seeing those scenes of the hostages being freed and coming home here. But for the historical timing, the date, the fact that we're dealing with a hostage situation, any more similarities that you can find in those two historical precedents or no? And should we be comparing the two? Are they worth comparing?
I think it's actually a worthwhile historical comparison. When Reagan came in, of course, he was seen as by certainly the Soviets used to say, they call him a cowboy. They were very concerned about what he was going to do or what he wasn't going to do. He was seen as far less predictable as Carter, and it was in many ways the fear of Reagan and what he was going to do that pushed Tehran to come to an agreement faster. All right. The same thing is being discussed here. That Trump is coming in. Of course, he didn't leave it really ambiguous. When he said there's going to be hell to pay, that's pretty clear that he's anticipating doing something rather forceful to get the hostages back and to get a ceasefire in place. And so in that situation as well, and I think everyone, the White House has been a little circumspect in the language, but I think everyone has agreed that Trump being elected and Trump's language and certainly the concern of what a President Trump will do if this thing isn't resolved before he comes into office, has been instrumental in getting Hamas to agree to what they have agreed to so far. So I find very stark parallels between those two. And of course, I just find it interesting because a lot of people forget what was going on politically with Reagan when he came in. Look, Reagan, we look at Reagan towards the end. A lot of people remember Reagan towards the end of his second term. A lot of the statesmanship, tear down this wall, stuff like that. When he came in, it was very uncertain, what had happened here. He was far more conservative than any president we'd seen. Well, pretty much any president we'd seen, I think, since the 1920s, probably. He was very conservative. He was very, very strong in his rhetoric, his anti-communist rhetoric. He had a truly powerful anti-communist record that he could stand on, saying, "Look, I've been saying this forever." And the Iranians were looking at this, saying, "Look, this is somebody who's probably not afraid of using military force." And frankly, I don't think he was afraid about using military force. And and I think that's kind of what's implied here. And I think there are really strong parallels. I would not be surprised if there's been communication with Iran, and Iran probably still the same thing. So, yeah, very strong parallels.
All right, Hal Kempfer, as always, can't thank you enough. And I would imagine these are going to be really emotional scenes come Sunday. And if we get them, which I assume we will be showing them live to our viewers. Hal, thanks so much. Have a good weekend.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.